I've always been drawn to isolation. Some people crave social interaction, the buzz of the city, the hum of constant human connection. But for me, the quieter, the better. That's why when I saw the job listing for a remote lighthouse keeper on a small, obscure job board, it felt like fate. It didn't matter that the position was in the middle of nowhere, tucked away on a rugged island off the northern coast. I had nothing left to keep me in the city, a failed career, a collapsed relationship, and a restless soul in need of something different. So I applied. The job description was vague. It didn't include specifics about the lighthouse's history, only a terse mention of the need for someone to maintain the light, monitor weather conditions, and stay vigilant. There were strange terms about rules that must be followed. The pay was far above average for such a remote position, with room and board included. I didn't ask questions. The email came a week later. You are selected. Your contract begins in 1 week. Do not speak to anyone during the trip. Upon arrival, you will be briefed in person. Do not deviate from the instructions provided. I didn't hesitate to accept. The journey itself was long and grueling. I boarded a small ferry at the break of dawn, traveling from the mainland to a desolate island somewhere in the cold, choppy waters of the northern coast. The sea breeze bit at my face, and the endless stretch of gray sky above blended with the dark water below, creating a feeling of utter emptiness. The captain of the ferry, an old man with deep-set eyes and a permanent frown, didn't speak a word to me the entire ride. After hours on the water, I finally saw the silhouette of the lighthouse rise from the jagged cliffs. It was an imposing structure, tall and grim, built of weathered stone. The light atop it burned like a solitary eye in the sky, cutting through the storm clouds. A cold shiver ran down my spine. When the boat finally docked, the captain didn't wait for me to disembark. He just turned the boat around and sped off into the fog. I stood alone on the dock, watching the ferry disappear into the mist. There was a note on the wooden post next to me, written in spidery handwriting. Follow the path, stay on the trail, do not stray. I stared at it for a moment, the words gnawing at my thoughts. There was something unnerving about the simplicity of it. Was it a warning, a rule, both? I couldn't say. The path was narrow and overgrown with wild brambles and twisted trees. With every step, the lighthouse loomed larger and the weight of isolation pressed in on me. As I approached the structure, I noticed the windows, tall, narrow slits of glass that seemed to reflect the world in an unsettling way, distorting it. The lighthouse itself seemed alive, breathing, or at least it felt that way. At the base, a door, rusted with age, stood ajar. I stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay. A spiral staircase wound upward, disappearing into the dark recesses above. I could hear the faint hum of machinery somewhere higher in the tower, and I could feel the pulse of something ancient in the air. A man stood at the top of the stairs, waiting for me. He was tall, gaunt, with a pale face and dark, hollow eyes that seemed to scrutinize me the moment I arrived. His uniform, a faded, military-style coat, clung to his frame like a ghost. "You're late," he said. His voice was quiet, measured, but carried an authority I wasn't prepared for. I thought you'd be expecting me," I stammered, unsure why I felt like I had just stepped into something much bigger than a job. "The rules are very clear," he replied, taking a step toward me. "No one arrives early. You will follow the rules to the letter. Any deviation will cost you dearly." His eyes locked onto mine. "Do you understand?" I nodded, unsure of what else to say. He handed me a thick, weathered folder. "Read it," he said simply, before turning away and disappearing behind the door at the top of the tower. I sat down on the cold stone floor and opened the folder. The first page was a simple list of rules, written in stark black ink. They were numbered. 1. The light must always be on. At no point can the lighthouse light be extinguished. If it flickers, you must immediately repair it. 2. No visitors. Under no circumstances are you to invite or allow anyone to approach the island. There is only one exception. 3. Stay inside after dusk. Do not leave the tower after sunset. Once the sun dips below the horizon, the island is not safe. 4. Do not stray from the path. The island's woods are forbidden. The path leading to the lighthouse is the only route allowed. 5. Listen to the bells. At night, you will hear bells. Do not ignore them, follow them. They will guide you to safety. 6. The time will come. There will be a time when the lighthouse will call. Do not ignore it. When it happens, you must obey. I froze. The last rule sent a chill through my bones. What did it mean? What would I have to do? The rest of the rules seemed simple enough, albeit odd, but the final one gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something far darker than a job. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was a sudden crash from above, a series of harsh sounds like metal grinding against metal, followed by a loud thud. My heart skipped in my chest. Before I could react, the man from the top of the tower returned. His face was more strained than before, as if he had aged a year in the span of minutes. "It's time for your briefing," he said. I stood, my legs unsteady as I followed him. As we climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something terribly wrong. The rules were just the beginning, and I hadn't even scratched the surface yet. The man led me to a small, dimly lit room near the top of the lighthouse, its stone walls cold and damp to the touch. There was a single wooden table in the center, covered with maps, journals, and strange mechanical devices that looked like they had been cobbled together by someone with far too much time and not enough sanity. He motioned for me to sit. His eyes never left my face, and the weight of his gaze felt like it was sinking into my skin, making it harder to breathe. I tried to focus on the room, to distract myself from the overwhelming sense of unease that seemed to be closing in on me. "You're here because we need someone like you," the man said, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. "Someone who can follow the rules, someone who doesn't question what's beyond the light." The way he said it sent a shiver crawling down my spine. I don't understand," I stammered. "What's beyond the light? What do you mean?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he slid one of the journals across the table to me. It was old, its cover cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. There were strange, almost cryptic markings in the margins, but the words were mostly legible. "You'll learn soon enough," he said with a thin smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You just have to keep the light burning. That's the first rule. The rest will follow." I opened the journal. The first entry was dated 20 years ago. "The light is our only salvation. As long as the light shines, the island remains protected. But when it flickers, when the light goes dark, that's when they come." The words were written in a hurried, desperate hand, as if the author had been racing against time. I read them twice, my mind struggling to grasp their meaning. "Who comes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man's face twisted slightly, as if my question had touched a nerve. He stood and paced in front of the window, staring out at the darkening sea. "You'll see soon enough," he muttered. "Once the sun sets, the rules are absolute, and I'm afraid you'll learn the consequences if you fail to follow them." My heart pounded in my chest. But what happens if I don't follow the rules? If I make a mistake? He turned to face me, his eyes now full of something I couldn't quite place, something ancient and knowing. "You'll regret it," he said simply, "but it's not just your life at stake. The island, it's alive. It doesn't take kindly to mistakes." The man turned back to the journal, flipping to the next page. The handwriting grew even more erratic. "I've made a grave mistake. The bells tolled, and I ignored them. I thought I could wait it out. Now, the light is flickering. It's not supposed to flicker. I can hear them outside the tower, their voices, low, guttural, like the wind itself speaking in tongues. I can't escape. I can't outrun them. The light is fading. Please, someone help." I closed the journal with shaking hands, my throat dry, my pulse quickening. "Is this?" I trailed off, unsure how to even phrase the question. "Is this what happens when the light goes out?" The man didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the journal, his expression unreadable. "That was many years ago," he finally said, as though dismissing the past with a flick of his hand. "You'll be fine if you follow the rules. It's simple. Just keep the light on. Don't stray. Don't listen to the whispers. Stay inside after dusk. You'll survive." "But what about the bells?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. "What do they mean?" He gave me a hard look, his eyes narrowing before he spoke again, his voice lower this time, more dangerous. "Listen to the bells, but do not leave the tower unless you are told to," he said. "The bells, they call you, but they don't always call to help. Sometimes, they call you to a much darker place." I didn't know what to say. The room was suddenly too small, too cold, and the air felt thick with something oppressive. I could barely breathe, could barely think. "Stay here tonight," the man continued. "I'll check on you in the morning. If you follow the rules, you'll be fine. If not," his voice trailed off. I nodded, but it didn't feel like enough. Nothing felt like enough. As the man left the room, the door creaking behind him, I sat there in the silence, staring at the journal and the strange devices scattered across the table. The weight of the rules pressed down on me, but the most unsettling thing of all was the feeling that the island itself was watching me, listening, waiting. I stood up and walked to the window, gazing out over the rocky cliffs and the turbulent ocean. The lighthouse was perched high above the water, a sentinel in the dark. It was hard to believe that something so seemingly benign could be the key to such horror. And then, as the last light of day faded, something caught my eye. Far out in the distance, just beyond the reach of the lighthouse beam, I saw a flicker, a shadow moving against the backdrop of the sea. I squinted, my pulse quickening, but the shadow was gone before I could make out anything more. Only the waves churned, whispering against the shore. I turned away from the window, my mind racing with thoughts. The rules, the warnings, the strange happenings. What was I getting myself into? What was this place, really? But one thing was certain, I had no choice but to follow the rules. To do anything else would be to risk everything. And as I glanced down at the journal once more, I saw the words on the last page, written in bold, desperate ink. "The light must always be on. When the bells toll, you must listen." The night was cold. The wind howled through the cracks in the lighthouse tower, making the old stone walls groan like a living thing. I lay in the small bed they had assigned me, staring up at the ceiling, my thoughts swirling in a haze of confusion and dread. It wasn't the isolation that bothered me, it was the overwhelming sense of something watching me. I could feel eyes on me even when I closed my own. And the rules weighed on me like an iron chain, each one a reminder that I wasn't supposed to question anything, not even when my instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. I must have drifted off into an uneasy sleep because when I awoke, it was to the sound of the bells. The bells. They tolled once, twice, then a third time, their sound reverberating through the stone of the tower, shaking the very air around me. The deep, mournful chimes echoed across the island like a death knell. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I had barely been asleep for a few hours. It felt as though the tolling of the bells had torn through my dreams, dragging me into the waking world. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. What was I supposed to do? The rules said to follow the bells, but they had also said to never leave the tower unless told to. I hesitated. I tried to listen to the rational part of my brain. It's just a sound, just an old tower making noise, I told myself. But something deep within me knew this wasn't normal. The bells were not ordinary sounds. They felt alive, purposeful. The rules had warned me not to stray, but if I ignored them, what would happen? Was it worth the risk? I glanced nervously toward the stairs, the metal creaking faintly in the distance. Was the man who'd greeted me earlier watching from the shadows? Was he listening to the bells too? Another toll. This one felt different. It wasn't just a sound, it was calling. I could feel it in my bones, and for a moment, I thought I heard something else, a faint whisper that seemed to come from all around me, rising from the very walls. It was impossible to make out the words, but the voice was low, guttural, like the wind had taken on a life of its own. I couldn't shake the feeling that the bell was not merely a signal, it was a summons, a warning, a command. I had to follow it. Without thinking further, I pushed myself up from the bed, feeling a sense of inevitability settle over me. I had no other choice. The rules said to listen to the bells, so I would follow them. I made my way to the top of the stairs, the creaking of the wood beneath my feet sounding far too loud in the stillness. As I ascended, the air grew colder, the atmosphere thicker. The higher I went, the more it felt as though something was watching me. I paused at the top of the spiral staircase, hearing the soft click of the lighthouse's machinery turning, preparing to guide the next beam of light. There was nothing else in the tower, nothing but the faint hum of the light and the ghostly presence of the bells. Then another toll. The sound was closer now, almost directly beneath me. It was as though the bells were coming from within the very walls of the lighthouse, reverberating from a place I could not see. I looked down, feeling the weight of the moment heavy in my chest. I turned toward the door leading to the balcony, the one that overlooked the sea. The light illuminated the world in a faint, cold glow, and the bells rang again, urging me onward. But something in my gut told me that the answer wasn't outside. The bell, it seemed, was leading me somewhere else. I turned and moved toward the farthest corner of the tower where a large, rusted metal door stood ajar, its frame half destroyed by the passage of time. It had been hidden from me earlier, but now, in the light of the bell's tolls, it called me forward. As I approached, the door creaked open on its own, as though it recognized me. The air inside this room was even colder, and the walls, smooth and unnervingly perfect, seemed to absorb the light, drawing it into darkness. I hesitated. The rules swirled in my mind like an echo, the warnings multiplying until they became a cacophony. Do not stray. Stay inside after dusk. The bells call. You must obey. I stepped inside. The room was like a basement, but it felt more like a tomb. Cold stone beneath my feet, rusted chains hanging from the ceiling, and old, dusty machinery scattered throughout. In the center of the room was a large, ancient contraption, something I couldn't even begin to identify. It seemed to hum with an unseen energy, its gears turning and creaking in the shadows. The bells tolled again, and this time I heard a voice. It was faint at first, nothing more than a whisper, but it grew louder, closer. It seemed to echo through my head, as though it was inside me, not just around me. Do you want to know why? The voice sent a chill through my spine, its words pulling me deeper into the room. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I felt like I was in a trance, like something beyond my control was steering my every action. The machinery began to pulse with a strange, rhythmic beat. It was synchronized with the tolling of the bells, and I knew, somehow, that I had to make a choice. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the light, plunging me into complete darkness. My heart raced. The air felt suffocating, thick with the stench of decay. The walls seemed to close in, and then, just as quickly as the darkness arrived, the light flickered back on. But I was no longer alone. In the corner of the room, something moved. A shadow, a figure emerging from the dark like a phantom, clothed in tattered robes that seemed to be woven from the very fabric of night. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with a sickly yellow light, and the air around it shimmered with a cold, malevolent energy. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My feet were rooted to the spot. The figure tilted its head as if studying me. Its lips parted, and the voice I had heard earlier spoke again, this time louder, clearer. You've broken the first rule. The figure in the corner of the room did not move, but it felt like the very walls of the lighthouse were shifting. It was as though the island itself had come alive, breathing in sync with the pulse of the machinery that hummed in the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure. Its presence seemed to distort the air, bending the light around it in unnatural ways. The shadows that clung to its form writhed, as if they were alive, stretching, recoiling, and reaching for me. I wanted to run, I needed to run, but my legs were like stone, unable to move. The figure's presence paralyzed me, not just with fear, but with something far worse, an overwhelming, suffocating sense of inevitability. The figure tilted its head, its glowing yellow eyes narrowing. I could feel its gaze pierce through me, digging into the depths of my soul. Its lips parted again, and I could hear the words before they even reached my ears, as though they were spoken directly into my mind. You've broken the first rule. The voice was sharp, like shards of glass cutting through the silence. The words reverberated inside my skull, rattling my bones. I tried to speak, but no sound came. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. Panic rose inside me, but there was nothing I could do to escape it. You were told not to stray. The words lingered in the air, thick with menace. And then something changed. The air grew colder, biting into my skin. The ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, and the walls around me began to shift, their smooth surfaces warping like the reflection in a cracked mirror. The machinery behind me groaned louder, its gears turning with more force now, almost as if it were alive, or perhaps waking up from a long slumber. The pulsing beat quickened, synchronized with my frantic heart. And then, the bell tolled again. The sound rang louder this time, more insistent. It was as though the bell was no longer a simple warning. It had become something else, a command, a summons. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward, its limbs moving in unnatural jerks, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Its glowing eyes fixed on me, and for the first time, I felt a rush of pure, unadulterated terror. It was no longer just a shadow in the corner. It was coming for me. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but the words stuck in my throat. I was trapped in the heart of the lighthouse, with the figure closing in, and the bells calling me to the center of the storm. I don't know how long I stood there, minutes, hours. The moment felt like it stretched into eternity, and then, without warning, the figure stopped just a few feet from me. Its presence loomed, oppressive and suffocating, and it spoke again. "The island demands its due." The words echoed through the room, shaking the very foundations of the lighthouse. It was as though the entire island had come to life, each rock, each tree, each wave crashing against the shore, vibrating with the same eerie force. I stumbled backward, trying to find some way to escape, but I could feel the door behind me. The way out was now completely blocked. The room had closed in around me, the walls pressing in with a relentless force. There was no escape. The figure's voice came again, softer this time, almost gentle, though it was laced with malice. "You were told to follow the rules, but now you must pay the price. The lighthouse never forgets." Before I could react, a deep rumbling sound echoed from somewhere deep within the tower. It was like the lighthouse itself was shuddering. The lights flickered, the beam casting long, unsettling shadows that danced across the walls. And then, the entire structure seemed to lurch, as if it were about to collapse. I reached for the wall, trying to steady myself as the ground beneath me trembled. The pulsing sound of the machinery grew louder, as though something was beginning to awaken deep within the bowels of the lighthouse. The bells rang once more, their toll deafening, and then, a single voice rose from the chaos. It wasn't the figure's voice anymore, nor was it the bells. This was a voice that seemed to come from the very air, from the island itself. "It's too late." The words hit me like a physical blow, their weight unbearable. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to face the figure one last time, but it was gone. The room was now completely empty, save for the humming of the lighthouse machinery. I was alone. The tremors of the lighthouse began to subside, and the air felt still, oppressive. I had no idea what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same. The light outside the tower flickered, then burned bright once more, but the world beyond the lighthouse was now different. The sea looked darker, as though the waters had been tainted by something malevolent. The sky had darkened too, the clouds twisting in unnatural shapes. I stumbled toward the stairs, my head spinning, my body still trembling. What had I seen? What had followed me? But the rules haunted me. I had broken the first rule by straying from the path. I hadn't listened to the bells, and now the island had come for me. I was no longer sure if I could trust the light to protect me. As I descended the stairs, I heard something. Footsteps behind me, soft at first, like a whisper in the dark, but they grew louder, closer. I turned, but there was no one there, just the sound. The lighthouse was watching me. The island was waiting. And the bells would toll again. I couldn't breathe. The air in the lighthouse had thickened, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The footsteps, those soft, unsettling sounds kept following me, just behind my heels. Each time I turned, there was nothing there, only the eerie stillness of the tower. Yet I could feel it, the presence, something watching me. I was no longer sure if I could trust the light. The machinery, the bells, even the walls themselves, all of it seemed to pulse with an energy that wasn't quite right. As though the lighthouse was more than just a building, it was a living entity. I reached the bottom of the staircase, feeling the rough stone beneath my fingers as I gripped the railing. My mind was spinning, my senses overwhelmed. The shadows had grown longer, darker, as though they had a life of their own. The light from the lantern flickered again, casting a distorted, sickly glow that made everything look like it was warped, as though reality itself had started to bend. I staggered into the main room, my thoughts racing. What had the figure meant when it said, "The lighthouse never forgets"? What was it trying to tell me? The weight of its words clung to me like an iron shackle. I couldn't shake the feeling that my very presence here had awakened something ancient and hungry. I had been brought here for a reason. The man, the journals, the rules. It was all part of something much bigger. But what was the cost? What did the island want from me? I tried to calm myself, tried to focus on the task at hand. The light. I had to keep the light burning. That was the one rule I had left to follow. I moved toward the control panel, my fingers trembling as I checked the dials and levers. The machinery hummed quietly, the gears grinding beneath the floor. The light flickered again, but this time it felt more deliberate, as though it, too, was watching me, waiting for something. I was so focused on the light that I didn't notice the whispers at first. At first they were just faint murmurs, almost imperceptible, like a breeze brushing past my ear, but then they grew louder, more distinct. "Come closer. We are waiting. You cannot escape." I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. My heart thudded painfully against my chest. The voice wasn't coming from the machinery or from anywhere physical. It was coming from inside me, from the walls of the lighthouse itself. It was as though the stone and the wood had come alive, speaking to me in a language older than anything I could understand. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room, looking for the source of the whispers. But there was nothing, only the cold, silent stone walls, their surface covered in strange, faint markings. I approached one of the walls, my fingers brushing against the rough stone. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though they were inside my head. "Don't touch it. You must listen." I jerked my hand back, heart racing. The voices had spoken in unison, a low, rumbling sound that resonated deep within me. But there was no one here, no figure, no other living soul. Just the walls, alive with sound. I backed away, disoriented. I didn't know what to do, where to go. The light was flickering erratically now, the shadows growing more pronounced in the corners of the room. Every time the light flashed, I thought I saw movement, shapes that weren't there in the moments before. The walls seemed to shift, their surface becoming more fluid, like the stone was melting, slowly at first, then faster, until the walls themselves were undulating, rippling with a dark, oily sheen. I stumbled back, horror clawing at my chest as I realized that the lighthouse was alive, not just haunted by the past, but a living, breathing thing. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, and this time, I knew they weren't just in my head. The walls were speaking, their voices filling the room, crawling into my skin. "You should never have come. The island will claim you. The light will burn." A sudden crack split the air. The machinery shuddered violently, the lights flashing once more, and then everything went black. For a moment, the world was silent. Then came a sound, a heavy thudding, like something large was moving just beyond the edge of the light. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to hear, my ears ringing with the absence of sound. And then I heard it. The footsteps, slow, measured, but unmistakable, heavy like the sound of boots on stone, coming closer. The footsteps were now inside the tower, inside the lighthouse. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was approaching, something that shouldn't be here, something that had been hidden, buried deep in the foundation of the lighthouse. And it was waking up. My heart hammered in my chest as I scrambled for the door, my feet slipping on the slick stone floor. But just as my fingers brushed the cold handle, the whispering came again. "You cannot leave. You must stay." The air around me turned frigid, biting into my skin. The door was now locked, no, sealed, as if the walls themselves had conspired to keep me in. My hands pressed desperately against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until the very floor beneath me seemed to shake with each step. I turned, and for the first time, I saw it. A figure, tall and slender, stepped out from the shadows. Its form was indistinct at first, like a mass of shifting darkness, but as it moved into the light, I could see its face, or rather, what remained of it. Its skin was gray and withered, stretched tight over a skull-like structure. Its eyes, black as pits, glowed with an unnatural light. And from its mouth, if it could even be called a mouth, came the whispers. You've broken the rules. It was real. The nightmare I had felt lurking in the walls was now in front of me, a twisted reflection of the island's will, and its eyes locked onto me with a terrifying hunger. The bells tolled, once, twice, and the figure stepped forward, its gnarled hand reaching for me. The figure's hand reached for me, its skeletal fingers stretching unnaturally long, like a spider's legs creeping through the darkness. I could feel the coldness of its touch before it even made contact, an icy chill that seemed to suck the warmth from the very air around me. My body froze, paralyzed with fear. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs refused to move. It was as though the very walls of the lighthouse were closing in, trapping me in a cage of stone and shadow. The figure loomed over me, its face twisted and hollow, its eyes glowing with that sickly, yellow light. And then it spoke, its voice low and rasping, like the sound of gravel grinding against metal. "You've broken the first rule." The words reverberated through my skull, louder than any bell, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread flood over me. It wasn't just the voice, it was the presence of the thing, something ancient and malevolent that had been waiting, hidden, beneath the island's surface. The lighthouse was its prison, and now it was free. I staggered backward, my heart pounding in my chest, every instinct screaming for me to escape, but there was no escape. The door was sealed. The walls pulsed with dark energy. The floor beneath me trembled, as if the lighthouse itself was breathing, hungry for the life it had been denied for so long. The price for defiance. The figure hissed, its voice growing more insistent, like a whisper in the back of my mind. "You will learn it soon enough." Before I could react, the air grew thick and oppressive, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to warp. The light flickered, then went out completely, plunging me into total darkness. I could hear nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing, the thud of my heart. Then the whispers came again. They were no longer just in the air. They were inside me, twisting through my thoughts, infiltrating my mind. "You cannot escape. You cannot hide. You are already ours." I felt my knees give way beneath me, and I collapsed to the cold, unforgiving floor. My hands reached out, desperately clawing at the stone, trying to steady myself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The world around me felt like it was collapsing, folding in on itself. The shadows twisted, taking on shapes, faces, hands, limbs, all reaching for me. And then I heard it. The sound of the bells, not from the tower above, but from within the walls themselves. The sound came from all directions, the deep, mournful tolls vibrating through my chest. It was louder now, more urgent, and each toll seemed to come with a jolt of energy that coursed through the room. "It's too late," the figure whispered. "You've already been claimed." The bells tolling filled the air, louder and louder, until it was all I could hear. The walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm, each vibration a cruel reminder of the rules I had broken. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs were like lead. The darkness pressed in, suffocating me, and I felt the shadows twist around my body, pulling me down into the cold floor. My heart raced, my thoughts scattered in a frenzy of panic. What was happening to me? And then the bells stopped. For one terrible moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears, thick with dread, like the world is holding its breath. But the silence didn't last long. The figure moved. It lunged at me, its clawed hand grasping at the air, and in an instant it was on top of me, its cold fingers wrapped around my throat, and I gasped, struggling for breath as the darkness pressed in from all sides. My vision blurred, the edges of reality fraying, and I could feel the crushing weight of something ancient, something that had been buried for centuries descending upon me. "You will learn the price of your defiance," it whispered, its voice now a chorus of voices, overlapping, twisting, becoming a cacophony of whispers that filled my mind, my soul. "The island will consume you." The darkness swirled around me, the bell tolls fading into the distance. For what felt like an eternity, I was lost in that suffocating blackness, unable to move, unable to think. Every part of me screamed for release, but there was no escape. And then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the weight lifted. I gasped, my lungs filling with air. My eyes snapped open, but I wasn't in the lighthouse anymore. I was standing at the edge of the cliff, the wind howling around me, the sea crashing violently against the rocks below. The lighthouse stood behind me, its light now brighter, almost blinding, and I could hear the bells ringing in the distance. but something was wrong. The sea had turned black, an inky, unnatural void that seemed to stretch on forever. The sky above was twisted, the clouds churning, thick and stormy, and in the distance I could see figures, shadows, emerging from the water, hundreds of them. I turned around, but the lighthouse was gone. All that remained was the cliff, the sea, and the darkness. "You've broken the first rule." The voice came from behind me, low and cold, but when I turned, there was no one there, only the shadows crawling toward me. "And now you must stay." The shadows closed in, enveloping me, and for the first time, I realized what had happened. I wasn't just in the lighthouse anymore. I wasn't even on the island. I had become part of it. The lighthouse's power, the island's power, had claimed me. My body, my soul had been absorbed into its darkness. The walls, the bells, the very fabric of the island, they had taken me, and now I was bound to it forever. I felt the ground beneath my feet dissolve, the sea pulling me in. I tried to scream, but the sound never left my throat. The shadows twisted around me, and in their depths, I saw faces, familiar faces. The people before me, the ones who had broken the rules before me, were now a part of the island too. They were the shadows. "We are the lighthouse now," the voice said, "and you will never escape." The darkness swallowed me whole, and I thought I was lost to the island, to the lighthouse, to the curse that had been waiting for so long. My limbs felt like lead, and every breath felt like it was drawn from a place I could not reach. The whispers filled my head again, like 1,000 voices murmuring all at once, too soft to distinguish, but too heavy to ignore. "You belong to the lighthouse now." The words were not spoken aloud. They were embedded in my mind, coursing through my thoughts like poison. The shadows tightened around me, becoming a living mass, pulsing with an energy that made my skin crawl. I tried to scream, but my voice didn't come. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. All I could feel was the darkness. It was everywhere, inside me, around me, sinking into my bones. And then, as if from nowhere, a light flickered in the distance, a faint, trembling glow like the pulse of a heartbeat. It was the lighthouse, its beam casting long shadows across the waves. But it was different now. The light was no longer a guiding force. It had become something else, something hunting. The light pulsed again, and the shadows shifted. I felt my body being tugged toward it, not by my own will, but by something far greater. The island's grip was tightening, and the pull of the lighthouse was irresistible. It was as if the island had a hunger, an insatiable need that had been waiting for centuries, and I had fed it. I tried to resist. I tried to move, to fight it, but I felt my feet leave the ground. The shadows coiled around my body, lifting me into the air. I was being dragged toward the light. "The island calls for you." The whispers were louder now, pressing in from all sides. I could hear them, voices from the past, people who had come before me. They were calling my name, their voices warped by time, distorted by the hunger of the lighthouse. "You are the lighthouse now." The words pierced my thoughts, the weight of them crushing my mind. I felt myself being pulled, sinking deeper into the island's web, until I was no longer in control. My body moved on its own, as if some invisible force was guiding me. The beam of the lighthouse grew closer, and I could see it now. The tower itself, standing at the center of the island, its massive walls pulsating with a strange, unnatural energy. The stone was alive, breathing, shifting. The air around it crackled with static, as if the lighthouse was a living organism. No, something more than that, a being. I felt the ground beneath me give way, and I was falling, tumbling through the air toward the lighthouse. The light, no longer comforting, no longer guiding, was now a consuming force, pulling me in like a magnet. It was hungry. The closer I got, the more I could hear the bells tolling, their deep, mournful clangs ringing through the air, reverberating through my body, shaking me to my core. Each toll felt like a blow to my very soul. And then I crashed into the base of the lighthouse, the world around me shattering into pieces. The stones beneath me felt alive, crawling against my skin as I struggled to find my bearings. The air smelled of salt and decay, of something old and rotting. The whispers surrounded me, thick and suffocating, growing louder and more frantic with each passing second. "You've come." I looked up, and there, standing in the shadow of the lighthouse, was the figure, the one I had seen before, but now it was different. Its form was more defined, more solid. The darkness that had once clung to it had become a part of it, like a second skin. Its eyes glowed with an intense, unholy light, and its mouth, if it could even be called a mouth, was twisted into a grotesque grin. "You've come home," the figure said, its voice a chorus of many, all overlapping, all blending together. "And now you will join us." I backed away, my heart racing. I could feel the presence of the island, of the lighthouse, pressing in on me from all sides. The light was no longer just a beacon. It was a trap, a snare designed to pull me in, to consume me. I tried to fight it, I tried to run, but the shadows wouldn't let me go. They closed in, wrapping around my body, tightening like chains. I struggled, gasping for breath, but it was no use. The island had me. "The lighthouse remembers," the figure said, its voice growing stronger, more powerful. "The island remembers." I felt the air shift around me, the ground beneath me tremble. The walls of the lighthouse seemed to bend and twist, as if they were shifting, moving, coming alive. The light was blinding now, washing over me, consuming me. I tried to scream, but the sound never left my throat. And then I felt it, the hunger. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, but it quickly grew. The island wanted something from me. The lighthouse needed something that I had to give, something that only I could provide. The darkness was inside me now. It was filling me, consuming me from the inside out. My thoughts were no longer my own. They were being pulled from me, twisted into something else. I was becoming part of the lighthouse. I was becoming part of the island's endless hunger. "You will never leave," the figure whispered, its eyes gleaming with malevolent satisfaction. "You will never escape." And then the bells tolled once more, louder than ever, their sound deafening, and the world around me broke. I awoke again, or at least, I think I did. The world was different this time. The sky above was a sickly shade of green, the clouds swirling in unnatural patterns, twisting like serpents in the wind. The sea had turned black, and the waves crashed violently against the shore, sending sprays of salt water high into the air. And there, standing before me, was the lighthouse. But it was no longer the structure I had known. It was something more, a towering, pulsating mass of stone and shadow, its surface writhing with dark energy. The light at the top of the tower flickered, but it was no longer a beacon. It was a trap. I realized then that I was not me anymore, not fully. I had become part of it, the island, the lighthouse. The hunger had taken root within me, and now I was bound to it forever. The island had claimed me, just as it had claimed all those before me. I could feel it, its power coursing through me, filling me with an insatiable need to feed, to pull in the next lost soul, to draw them into the lighthouse's web. The bells tolled once more. The island's hunger never sleeps. It never tires. I can feel it now, coursing through my body, a cold, gnawing hunger deep within my chest. It's not my hunger, not anymore. It's the island's, the lighthouse's, a hunger that has lived for centuries, a void that can never be filled. I look at the sea, dark, black, endless. It churns in a rhythm that matches the beating of my heart. Waves crash violently against the rocks, sending sprays of salt water into the air. The sky above is a sickly shade of green, twisted and unnatural, as if the very heavens themselves have been warped by the island's will. And then I see it. A ship, a small fishing vessel, its sails torn and ragged, drifting slowly toward the island. I can feel its presence even before I see it. The lighthouse knows, the island knows, and I know they are coming. The figures on board are oblivious to what awaits them. I can feel their lives, their souls, just waiting to be consumed. The lighthouse will call them. It always does. And I will be here, standing on this cursed shore, waiting for them, waiting to feed the hunger. I stand at the water's edge, watching the ship grow closer. The air is thick with tension, heavy with the weight of the island's power. The ship crests a wave, and for a moment, I can see the faces of the men aboard. They are tired, worn, but they are alive and unaware of the fate that awaits them. The bells toll. The sound is deafening, a deep, mournful clang that echoes across the island. It is not the bells of the lighthouse. It is something deeper, something older. The island itself is calling. The shadows shift and I feel the pulse of the lighthouse beckoning. It is time. The ship drifts closer to shore, and the men aboard begin to notice something is wrong. Their eyes flick nervously around, but they see nothing. They hear nothing but the wind and the waves. They are unaware that they are walking into a trap, a place where time itself is twisted, where reality bends and breaks. I move. My body, no longer truly mine, no longer just flesh and bone, glides silently through the shadows. The island has claimed me, the lighthouse has claimed me, and now I am one with it. The hunger is inside me, it guides me. I reach the shore as the ship finally touches the sand, its hull scraping against the rocks. The crew disembarks, their boots thudding softly against the stone. They are cautious now, their eyes scanning the horizon, but they see nothing. Nothing except the lighthouse, standing tall against the darkened sky. They cannot see us yet, I think. They will, soon. They are drawn toward the lighthouse, just as I was, just as all who came before me were. The hunger calls them, and they will answer. They speak in hushed tones as they move closer, but I hear their words as though they were whispered directly into my ear. This place, it's not right, one of them says, his voice trembling. I don't like this. Another man, younger, shakes his head. It's just an old lighthouse, nothing more. But they are wrong. It is never just a lighthouse. It is a prison, a place of death, a place of hunger. I watch them with detached interest, feeling the familiar pull inside me, urging me toward them. The cycle has begun again. The island will claim them, and I will watch, I will feed. They draw closer, their steps slow but sure. They're curious but wary. The air around us crackles with energy, and the ground beneath our feet feels like it's vibrating. The island is awake. The hunger is awake. I stand in the shadows, my eyes following their every move. They are unaware, so blissfully unaware of the fate awaiting them. They are so close now, so close to the tower, one step away from sealing their doom. And then, it begins. The wind picks up, swirling around them, howling like a wolf at the moon. The lighthouse begins to glow, its beam cutting through the darkness, brighter than ever before. The bells toll again, louder, deeper, shaking the very foundations of the island. They stop, all of them. And in that moment, I see it, their eyes widen in recognition. The lighthouse has called them, the island has claimed them, but it is too late. The shadows begin to rise around them, twisting, forming shapes, figures, faces. I see them now, the faces of those who have come before. Their hollow eyes stare at the men, unblinking, as the darkness swirls around them. They're trapped, I think. The men begin to panic, their footsteps faltering as they try to retreat. But the shadows move faster, they close in, surrounding them. The island has them, the hunger has them. The light, once a beacon of safety, is now their executioner. The first man screams, his voice breaking as the shadows swallow him whole. The others try to fight, try to run, but the shadows are everywhere now. They are no longer just shadows, they are us. They are the souls of the lighthouse, the remnants of those who were claimed before. The hunger spreads. One by one, the men are consumed, pulled into the darkness, their cries fading into nothing. They try to resist, but it is futile. The island's hunger is relentless, and I watch. I watch as the last of them disappears into the darkness, and then there is silence. The lighthouse stands still, its light fading into a dull, sickly glow. The bells stop tolling. The island breathes again, its hunger momentarily sated. Though I know it will never be enough. The cycle will continue. More will come, more will fall. I stand in the darkness, feeling the pull of the lighthouse, feeling the hunger gnawing at my soul. I am part of it now. I am one with the island. The cycle will continue, and I will always be here, watching, waiting, feeding. The island has consumed so many before me, their faces, distorted, hollow, part of the shadows that writhe beneath the lighthouse's watch, linger in the depths of my mind, like memories I can't shake. The hunger is growing inside me, just as it always does. It's like an itch beneath my skin, a constant gnawing sensation that demands to be fed. I am no longer who I once was. The man who arrived at this island is gone. There is only the hunger now. The lighthouse stands tall against the horizon, its beam cutting through the night, never wavering. The bells toll with each passing moment, a sound that echoes through my very soul. It's a calling, it's a signal, it's a warning, and yet no one ever heeds it. I can hear them now, the new souls. They're close. A ship, another small vessel, appears on the horizon, its sails tattered, its course unwavering. I can feel the island drawing it in, as it draws everything in. The sea is no longer its own entity, it belongs to the island. The sea belongs to the lighthouse, and soon it will belong to me. I feel the familiar pulse of the lighthouse, that slow, rhythmic hum that courses through my veins, syncing with the beat of my heart. It's calling, they're coming. I stand on the shore, waiting. I can no longer remember why I was ever afraid of the island. I can no longer remember who I was before it. All I know is the hunger and the pull of the lighthouse. I watch as the ship nears, the figures aboard, just like all the others before them, unaware of the fate awaiting them. They are so close, so near. They see the island now, but it is too late. The shadows are already moving, creeping along the rocks, stretching like tendrils, waiting to consume them. They disembark. I can see them clearly now. Two men, young, still hopeful, still full of life. But they will soon learn that hope has no place here. Not on this island. Not with the lighthouse watching. They pause for a moment at the water's edge, their eyes drawn toward the towering structure. The lighthouse looms over them like a sentinel, its light flickering ominously. I see the fear in their eyes. It's a familiar sight. I felt it, too, when I first arrived. But that fear, that fleeting terror, will soon be replaced by something far worse. It always is. The bells toll again, and this time, it's different. The sound is deeper, more insistent, as though it's coming from within the island itself. It is the final warning, the last toll before the darkness takes them. The shadows rise from the ground. The air thickens with the same oppressive weight that has claimed all who have come before. The men try to run. They shout to each other, calling out for help, but their voices are drowned by the roar of the waves and the ringing of the bells. The shadows move faster than they can, closing in around them, wrapping them in darkness. I can feel it. They're mine now. The hunger stirs within me, louder than ever. It's not my own anymore. I am the island. I am the lighthouse. I am the curse. And they are the next to join the cycle. One of the men falls, tripping over the jagged rocks, his scream cut short as the shadows envelop him. The other man tries to pull him free, but it's hopeless. The darkness closes around them both, swallowing them whole. Their cries fade into nothing. And just like that, they are gone. The cycle continues. I stand in the shadows, watching as their bodies disappear into the earth, their souls consumed by the lighthouse. The hunger is satisfied, for now, but it will return, as it always does. The cycle will continue. I feel the pull of the lighthouse again, stronger now. The hunger inside me is quiet for the moment, but I know it won't stay that way. I am bound to it forever. There is no escape. There is no end. The lighthouse's beam sweeps across the sea, shining brighter than ever before. It calls to anyone who dares to venture near. They will come. They always do. I turn away from the shore, walking back toward the tower. The stone feels cold beneath my feet. I can hear the whispers now, those who have come before me. Their voices are like the wind, swirling around me, speaking in a language I can't understand. You are one of us now. We are the lighthouse. The hunger stirs inside me again, relentless, and I can feel myself change, becoming more than just flesh and bone. The island is alive, and I am part of it. The lighthouse is alive, and I am its keeper. The bells toll once more, the sound deep and final, like the closing of a door that cannot be opened again. And as the light from the lighthouse shines down on the shore, I know, this place, this island, will never stop. It will never be free. The hunger will always be there, waiting. And I will always be here, standing at the edge of the dark, waiting for the next lost soul to come. The cycle is eternal.